Thank you all for joining us. Really appreciate it. This has been a great series. This is the third in our series. And today, Chris White and Mike Heison will be presenting information on the hands-on training for ZEV transition. Today, we're going to talk medium and heavy-duty zero-emission vehicles. For those of you who either didn't join us for the first two sessions or who would like to sort of refresh what happened there or look at the materials, both of these first two sessions were posted to the Sacramento Clean Cities website. That is cleancitysacramento.org on the events page. And today's presentation materials and video will also be presented there or posted there. The presentation materials will be posted right away, and the video will be there in a day or two. So without further ado, I will then ask Chris, I guess you're going to take it over at this point.
I am going to take it over at this point.
So you just, I will stop sharing. Ooh, there you go.
Okay. And I will start sharing. As I pull this up, I have to tell you all a little bit. I see a lot of new names this time and some names of folks that aren't in California. So although I am talking California, many of these things will also apply to you. I also want to make sure that you know that because we do have some same folks, I'm not going to cover exactly the same stuff as I did last time. So you may see a few skip steps in here. A little bit about me that I find surprising about my own self is that I actually, my great-grandfather operated one of the first automotive repair businesses in the United States, back when cars were really new. And I grew up listening to things about cars. My grandpa, when I was around, was also an antique car dealer, and we went to lots of shows and swap meets and trade events. And I sat around and listened to people talk about carburetors and headlights and tires. And I thought, oh my God, I never want to be like that. I'd be in the car with my mom and my grandpa, and it's like, oh, look, there's the new Buick. Oh, I haven't seen a Datsun in that color before. And I said, I am never going to be that person. Well, now I am that person. And in the last 2 years, I've become that person about trucks too. And I think it's a little bit scary when I go, oh my God, look, there's the new Kenworth. And I think, oh, I shouldn't know that. But here we are. And so we are going to talk today about moving from where we are with the trucks that you're operating to what you want to do next. Now, I will tell you, I am not the world's expert on trucks. I am learning a lot as I go along, as I talk to different fleets about their configurations and about the folks that are building trucks and providing fuel about what they're doing as well. So this is the same as last time, a little bit about what Mike and I do in his fleet transition planning. This is a bit of our process as we really look at the vehicles first, and that's the area that I really specialize in. Mike works really hard on that infrastructure plan and how we mesh the two of them together. And then we also look overall at together the energy plan. And I have to say this energy plan, I should start putting one more thing in here because we're also working a lot on the people plan and how we encourage the people to move to this as well. Well, before I launch into the presentation, I want to do just a little bit of terminology. And that terminology is the difference between a platform and a truck. So when you go to HVIP or some of the other websites, you'll see things that look like trucks, but are actually platforms. So the first part of platform is like this Ford E450. That companies like Motive and Lightning and others buy. They add their own powertrain to it. They put their own e-axles on and they build the body style, but that chassis came from Ford. Now, the next level of a platform is the platform that has the power in it already. And so you're seeing two versions here, the Heison fuel cell truck, and I forget who I pulled that one from. I think it's Kenworth. These are vehicles that have the bottom part, but they also have that manufacturer's powertrain on it. So in Heison, it's fuel cells, batteries, hydrogen tanks, their e-axles. In the Kenworth one, it's the same thing. It's their batteries, it's their power management system, it's their e-axles that are driving those vehicles. Then someone can upfit them and add the back onto that vehicle. That's important to know because when you look at some of these platforms, you can say that's a great vehicle for me, or that would work perfect for me. But the secret is you're buying that platform, then you take it somewhere else and ask them to put the dump bed on it or whatever you need. There's also an opportunity to work directly with these manufacturers to build multiples of the same thing that perhaps many agencies could share. So I just want you to keep this in mind as we go through this, is it's not like going to the Toyota dealership and buying a car. You have a lot of ways that you configure an electric truck or zero emission truck. So first, let's talk just a little bit about the regulations that are driving this. Tim is having a whole session about the advanced clean fleet regulation, and so I don't want to really spend a lot of time on that one today. I just do want you to know what's driving this. This chart is from the ICCT, and it shows how the manufacturers have to sell ZEV trucks. The regulation is very specific about amounts and the types of trucks. So you see, for instance, on that blue line is the amount, the number of class 2 and 3 pickups and vans that they need to sell as that regulation moves forward. So it starts off pretty small for everybody over here in 2024, just between 5 and 9% of very specific vehicles. Now, the Advanced Clean Fleet regulation, which is still in formation and is not passed, is the one that says you have to buy vehicles. The way that it's written right now, subject to change, is that by 2024, a private fleet with 50 vehicles or more, $50 million in revenue, and by the way, this is $50 million of revenue nationwide, not just in California, a public fleet or any drayage vehicle that operates at a port or a rail yard. By 2024, 50% of your new vehicle purchases must be ZEVs, and this is class 2 through 8. By 2027, 100% must be ZEV. So think about what the automakers have to, truck builders have to sell and what you have to buy. And that's why it's really important to plan. Now, I will also tell you it's important to be giving feedback about this regulation and make sure that we are matching the availability of vehicles to what you need to buy for your fleet. So there's plenty of time for this. And by the way, there are exceptions. There's some exceptions for plug-in hybrids will count. There are exceptions for really small and rural public fleets. So not hard and fast, and just showing you the big picture here. So let me put these together and show you the planning timeline if Advanced Clean Fleet is passed as it's written, subject to change. We're here right now, 2022 and 23. So you want to be thinking about introducing ZEVs and near ZEVs, trying them, see how they fit in your operation, and make a decision about how these vehicles are going to be fueled or charged. So you're planning the infrastructure, because by 2024, you want stations to be installed and operational as you start buying the vehicles you have identified. You're also going to know whether your path forward is going to be batteries and charging, fuel cells and hydrogen, or a mixture of both, so you can start building this infrastructure for this year, 2027, when 100% of your purchases will need to be zero emission vehicles. You know, that planning timeline is really important, because right now, when you need a new vehicle, you just buy one and the station's already there. This time, there's a lot of construction work, a lot of permitting, a lot of planning that needs to go in it. And some of this may be that you change the way that you operate just a little bit. So that is a little bit of the timeline. And I have a feeling that this is going to shift somewhat. This timeline is going to shift somewhat. So now let's look at the vehicles that are targeted for ZEVs. And this fleet is from Drive to Zero, which was an initiative that CalSTART ran, and it shows through 2023, when the regulation kicks in, what they expected in different styles of vehicles. And they're really limited types right now. And I think we all know that we're looking for things that have a routine schedule. They go home at night. You can really you really can predict the way in which they're going to be used. The other thing that we really look at is vehicles that have a long dwell time, that they're going to sit for 8 or 10 hours, and they don't carry much load. So when I take a look at how those types play out on the DOT list of vehicles by weight and by class and by type, the ones that are outlined in red are really the low-hanging fruit to moving to a zero-emission vehicle. They tend to have very predictable routes. They tend to return to base and sit still for a long time. They might charge, like a school bus is super easy, very predictable route. A delivery vehicle can be dispatched and its route can be mapped days in advance sometimes. When we start looking at the ones that are in black, those have somewhat predictable schedules and they usually return to base, but not to all. So those are where for your own trucks, you're going to want to look at the duty cycle and recognize, if I have to buy 50% ZEV, I'm going to look for the ones that I can predict the way that they're going to operate. But those are the classes that we're looking at first. And there are definitely vehicles that I didn't circle or square that are moving toward electric as well. They are more in a pilot stage where we're seeing low numbers built and they're testing the durability, the reliability. So I don't see those as being available really in a big way by 2024. So now, how do you start collecting this information? How do you know which trucks you're going to replace first? So last time I gave you quite a long inventory list. This time I'm giving you a little bit shorter one that we want to know about the vehicles. And an awful lot of folks aren't tracking this information yet. And that's okay. This gives you an opportunity to start doing this. We want to know the VIN, and that's all we really need to know about that. What type of equipment does this vehicle have? We've run into instances now where we don't know that, for instance, the big old motorhome that you're operating is also operating a satellite for communications in remote areas. Or does it have a welder mounted on board that's running off AC/DC when you're using it? We also want to know what it regularly tows. And a lot of the electric vehicles are rated to tow 300 or 400 pounds, but not 3,000 or 4,000 pounds. So we want to know what it's doing. We want to know the amount, if it has one of those devices, how much time is the engine providing power to the equipment? And are you idling at a job site? Not in traffic, but once you're there, is it just running? We want to know where it parks on a regular basis. And a lot of heavy duty vehicles don't have an assigned domicile. They kind of park where they're done for the day or where they need to be for the next shift. And then how many hours are they parked at that domicile? It's also really helpful to know if they're going to a regular spot and sitting with the engine off during the shift. And if they're doing that, how long are they sitting there? And by the way, that cannot be lunchtime. And we talked about that a little bit last time. I think that wage and hour laws will say that charging a vehicle during your lunch break will be on the clock time, because the way that the law is written is a lunch break, you have to be able to go where you want to go. You can't be assigned to a spot. So we want to know where it is. And then the number of days a week it's in service and the hours per day, and then any special equipment that it has. Now, what's important here are my two columns is that we have a typical day and an emergency day. An emergency day could be when the water line breaks. It could be when we have COVID and everybody goes into emergency operations. It could be when we have a wildfire and need to evacuate. So we always want to plan for the worst case scenario. And I think that's one of the big showstoppers I hear as we talk to fleets about this, is that every driver immediately goes to the worst case scenario. they immediately go to the one time something happened 5 years ago and could it do this? Or they go to that one bad story that they heard or that terrible experience they had with an early vehicle. So let's acknowledge those fears. Let's make sure we're incorporating the worst case scenario, but we also want to do your plan based upon the typical day.
Yeah, just one
So-
addition on that, Chris. For charging infrastructure, we don't plan the charging infrastructure for the emergency day, but we do want to make sure that we have contingencies to address that.
So a little bit about the VIN and why, what we find a lot in our car inventories are really good with make, model, fuel type. They're really, really good. In most of the truck inventories that we get from our clients, the VIN does not match something about the vehicle. They have the class wrong, they have the fuel wrong a lot. So we actually use a Vin Decoder. And you all can do this too. It's free. It's from NHTSA. There are like 20 of them out there. You can type in them VIN one by one. You can upload them as a spreadsheet. But the VIN has all sorts of secret information in there. And among those are the type of fuel that it used, the right class. This is really great if you're doing your carb reporting or reporting to clean cities, is don't go off what's in your inventory, run the VIN check and make sure you have all of that information. Sometimes in this part where it says the vehicle brand, body style, engine, sometimes that code has a ridiculous amount of information. It'll tell you it's an extended cab and a long bed and other things. And other times it just gives you the bare basics, but it's still enough for us to know that. You will also be able to see the assembly plant where it was assembled. And if it was made in the United States. One of the other cool things that we can find in the VIN is we can find vehicles that were originally targeted for export. So the VIN actually has, it's kind of like playing CSI detective into knowing things about these vehicles. So that is about the VIN. And then let's talk briefly about duty cycle. And we talked about this last time too. The vehicles that you see in this slide are all Ford F-550s, and they are all used by a municipal fleet. And if you looked at them on paper, they all look like they're pretty low mileage vehicles. But you can see just for looking at the pictures that they have very different uses, very different duty cycles, very different equipment that's attached to it. So let's find out how those vehicles are being used. Carol, you said some of the free apps for decoding VINs. If you go to the NHTSA website, and maybe Mike, you can pull up the Vin Decoder while I'm talking and paste it in the chat. There are a bunch of them. If you just even Google Vin Decoder, you'll see a whole bunch of them. In addition to knowing what type of equipment and what this vehicle is doing, we also want to know if it's going off road. This water truck here, you can't see the back of it, but it probably has a driller digging machine on the back of it, and it would go up the highway and drive off the road off somewhere separate and start digging. And then the people needs too. What did you guarantee your workers? Does it need to have ports for their phones to charge? Does it need to carry camping equipment, which happens for some of these vehicles like these fire trucks? This truck might be dispatched for 3 days and it needs to be able to carry equipment to sustain life. So we want to know all of those about the duty cycle. And one of the best ways to get that information is just to ask the drivers. And I do have a survey that I can send you. I'll drop my email in the chat at the end, and I'm happy to send you the survey that you can distribute to start asking drivers how they're using the vehicles. You don't need to know it for all of them. We have some people who will think that this is too invasive and they don't want to answer, and that's okay. You just need to get it for a representational number.
And while you're saying that, Chris, I'm just going to mention, and I'll say it again at the end, in the documents that we post, we'll have both your email and a way that people can ask for any documents you're willing to share, as well as this presentation, which you have already agreed you will share.
Yes, for sure. A quickie about the F-550 platform or GMC 1500 or anything else in that medium cycle. With the municipal fleets we work with, this is the majority of their fleet, is this body of truck. it is not on the regulation to be electrified. It kind of falls into a gray area. Both Chevy and the company whose name I don't remember that now owns Dodge have announced that they're looking at that heavy duty platform, but it will be somewhere 2024, 2025.
Stellantis.
But this, yes, Stellantis. This is one of those areas that it's worth considering. Could a group of fleets design one kind of standard body and then have an upfitter build it for you, so that you're not just buying one, but maybe if there are a group of you that can buy 100, that's a great place for any one of your upfitters of choice to build something on an existing platform that would meet your need. Okay, now we're going to move on to some of the things that Mike likes to talk about. This is our second set of information about how you get these vehicles fueled or charged. So we also want to know this information about where they park, how long they park. We also want to know at that facility, what's its requirement for backup power or emergency power? Do you have a generator already installed? Do you have a battery energy storage system? Is there something there that can make sure your emergency vehicles have emergency power? The final part of that is knowing what type of fueling systems that you have installed already. Are you using an automatic recognizer like a Ward system to be able to attach the amount of fuel to the vehicle by department, or gauge who's doing the fueling and when? And then finally, what type of fueling depot or contract that you have. Are you already managing your own diesel tanks? Do you use some type of card lock system where you're going elsewhere? And we really want to know what type of contracts you're already locked into. We have a couple of clients that have long-term contracts for the operation of an on-site fueling depot. And as they move to something that's not diesel, it will change the way that that contract is played out. We have another client that's renegotiating a contract right now, and they're in Washington, and there is no renewable diesel in Washington right now, but we want to make sure that their contract requires that when it becomes available, so that they can certainly get it when the time is right. So the dwell time for charging. The dwell time dictates the charger that you get right now. This chart is from SoCal Edison. They have a charge ready transport program, and this is a link I'm going to put in the chat for you right now. This was actually created by Gladstein Neandros, the people who put on ACT Expo, for SCE, and I think it's a really, really good resource about how you make some decisions about charging for trucks. So this is one chart that shows if you're using level 2 charging, for the most part, you're talking about a dwell time of 8 to 10 hours. For DC fast charging, you can charge much quicker in about 4 to 6 hours for a truck, but you'll also see that how it changes the energy use. And that's part of what Mike figures out, is we take a look at what the need is, how fast you can charge. If you're having public works vehicles that are operating 16-hour shifts, you're probably going to have to do DC fast charging. Or do we do a combination of level 2 charging at the corp yard and some DC fast charging out at the places that they normally go? Maybe it's a maintenance shop. You know, how do we set that up so that it makes sense, and it also makes sense for your energy use? And I do think that as you start implementing the vehicles, the picture of this is going to change. We hear a lot about longer range batteries, and some of those vehicles, like garbage trucks, refuse trucks, are waiting for longer range batteries to come out. The longer range battery means longer charging time, or else it means a greater flow of electricity. So if you're thinking about trucks in 2027, I don't know that this math is going to work right now, but the where is going to work right now. And also understanding if you have something that can charge over 6 hours, and if you need something that can charge in 2 hours, that makes a big difference as well. Now I have a couple pictures here of truck charging. And I have to admit, there are not many examples of these yet because they are really, really new. And you can see how these are set up in rows at parking spaces for vehicles to pull in. And in this Penske one, these are big transformers that are sitting in between, and they also have some energy storage at site. This diagram shows really what we're thinking about for truck charging. It will likely be 1 or 2 vehicles per charger. We're seeing a real trend toward DC fast charging because of there's that trade-off of if I can charge everybody in 6 hours and share a charger, that makes more sense than putting in one for every truck. We're also thinking about backup power and storage, and this needs a cooling system because these chargers are going to get super duper hot as they charge. We're also thinking about weight and how much does all of this weigh, and does the parking lot, the way it's designed now, will it support the weight of all of this charging equipment? So we're thinking about all of those things as we go. And by the way, I have not seen a lot of your courtyards that have all of this land right next door to build this great big thing. So we do look at how we can fit this on top of buildings or over canopies as well. So the flip side of this is what it looks like for hydrogen. And this is a diagram of an electrolyzer station. And I have to admit, there are even fewer examples of hydrogen stations than there are of charging stations. Hydrogen can be produced on site. It can use solar or wind energy for electrolysis. You can produce it from methane, landfill, cow manure, rotting wood, rotting tomatoes. There are lots of ways to produce hydrogen. It can be made on site. It can be produced centrally. Chevron and Plug Power are just starting a great big hydrogen production facility in the Central Valley that will be using 100% renewable green hydrogen, mostly from cow manure, that will increase the hydrogen supply chain. Now, one of the things to think about with hydrogen is one station fills many trucks. In fact, if you have seen Sunline Transit present, they have one station that will fill 100 fuel cell buses and provide fuel for other trucks and cars. And they're doing it with on-site electrolysis from wind energy. You can have this station built for you, just like you have your own diesel fueling station now. This one's a Shell station at the Port of Long Beach, or it can go into an existing cardlock station or a travel center. And this one happens to be in Sweden. You can kind of tell that because they're pulling a triple, which we can't do in California. So there are different ways of doing this as well. One of the benefits of a hydrogen station is that if you're having somebody else build it for you, like Shell, you're not paying for that. You are, however, going to pay for the fuel. One of the other benefits with hydrogen is it does not need to have backup power. It can actually be backup power. It can be energy storage and backup power. So both options, fuel cells and batteries are zero emission. Both are good. Both have their trade-off. Both of them, by the time that you get ready to do this, are going to be different in their technology readiness. They're going to be different in their price, and they're going to be different in their scale. So do not look at what it is today and say, this is how it's going to be 5 years from now. But again, this is part of planning. Do you want to manage your own fuel? Do you want it on site with electricity? Do you want something that is more like a truck stop with hydrogen? Do you want both? So with bringing in hydrogen and fuel cells and thinking about the way that hydrogen stations can be set up, with thinking about how we could build some of these battery charging depots for trucks and other vehicles to be out in the community, it changes much more the scope of the vehicles that are available. We can start looking at things that are less predictable. We can start looking at things that have longer routes. We can look at maybe trucks, instead of return to base, go from port to destination and back again. So it changes the way that does that. What I don't see happening in the near term are these really, really, really heavy vehicles. These vehicles that are going over the road, that are away from home for nights, that aren't following regular basis, that are running a cement mixer, that are putting out fires at fire stations. I think that we are further away from those. And if you think again about that advanced plain truck regulation, they're looking way out into 2035 and 2040. So these are not high on my list for being near term. And by the way, one of the reasons that I have the fuel trucks circled here is that right now, neither battery vehicles nor fuel cell vehicles are certified to haul hazardous materials. So that's another thing that you really want to think about in your inventory. And I had that listed in my inventory sheet. Is it a hazmat truck? And that could be everything from, did you know that onion peels are considered hazardous material? So are citrus peels. Because of the high sulfur content, they are considered a hazardous waste. So you really want to think about that as well. So a few other parameters to think about as you're making your plan, as your willingness to try an emerging technology. This is the time to do it. Get some operational experience, work with your organization or work with us or Clean Cities on grants. You all may have heard that we signed an infrastructure bill and we'll see more money coming out for vehicle electrification. But are you willingness to go out there on the edge and try something? I mentioned last time that CEC has a new grant out right now for vehicle to building integration. And that would be doing something like if you're using an ESCO, an energy service that is managing the energy within your building, could it also talk to the vehicle and shoot the information back and forth from the vehicle? So are you willing to do that? You know, it's a great opportunity. However, it can be inconvenient. So think about that. Are you really loyal to one type of platform? If you're Ford all the way, maybe you don't want something that's a Ford platform with a different vehicle on the top of it. And you have to decide that for yourselves. The funding and chasing down funding is very resource intensive. I should also mention that reporting how you're using the funding is very resource intensive. Do you have that in-house? Do you need some help with it? Gina was just mentioned she's trying to put together a grant writing workshop. Take a look at that. How about workforce development and training? We just had this conversation. I think Mike and I were talking about. Oh no, it was my colleague Thomas and I. Is his vision of how people are going to shuffle the trucks around to charge them using the same charger. It's like, well, that's like a 2-person job. Who are you going to move from job A to job B in order to just shuffle vehicles around or pick them up? So what has to happen there? And then with training, particularly in your maintenance shop, Tim's Fleet Academy, which will happen again next year, is a great opportunity to learn about how things are different with battery electric and fuel cell electric vehicles. And then the big one is change management. And I threw this in there because there are 0 people who want to change willingly. For most people, moving into these new platforms has some sacrifice. It has some discomfort. I mentioned earlier, they immediately go to worst case scenario. Interestingly, though, in the pilot projects that we run with electric trucks, when we ask drivers at the end, they have found that they are so much more comfortable. It has reduced the number of backaches and worker comp injuries from sitting in a loud or jiggly vibrating truck. So there's some real benefits to health in this as well. So important points that I really want you to take away with, and then we're going to open it up for questions and discussion. And please feel free to take yourself off mute and ask your question out loud. The big thing is, this is not happening tomorrow. We are not asking you to replace all your 550s or all of your utility trucks tomorrow, but you do need to plan for that first wave of thou shalt buy in 2024, 2025 today. You need to know which ones you can replace and how we're going to go about this. Renewable fuels, propane, diesel, and natural gas need to be a part of the plan. You know, I showed you those vehicles that I think are a long way from transitioning, and others of those vehicles, you may not put the first one in your fleet until 2030. So what can we do today to help you reduce the carbon? And then that other is that opportunities for the group buys. You all may not know that in the Sacramento area, the transit agencies, 9 transit agencies jointly purchase buses. They all purchase them with SAC-RT. They all buy the same thing every time. So is there an opportunity for you to use that same model for these 9 counties around here to come together and all order something that's really standard on one of those platforms so that you're starting your transition together? So that are your takeaways and thoughtful items today. I will give these slides to Tim after I make any corrections that need to be made, because I am not the be all end all expert, and I can see Danielle has already come off mute, so she's probably got something she wants to help me with.
Before she does it, I just want to jump in on that second bullet point on that last slide, Chris. And we covered this a little bit on the first presentation, talking about charging infrastructure, but you need to work backwards from where you need to be. So when those vehicles do become available in the platforms or the vehicles become available in a cost-effective way, you're going to need to have the fueling or charging infrastructure in the ground and operational. So if you think about what that means, it's going to take a year to perform the design, the permitting, and the installation, and probably another year before that for planning and financing, because you're going to need to get your council to approve the budget to that, and to do that, you're going to need to have a pretty decent estimate, which means you need to do some planning. So at the very least, assume about a 2-year time frame between the time that you start the process and the time you're going to have the charging or fueling infrastructure operational. So that's why that's a really important point to get rolling on it now.
Danielle, you're on.
I accidentally came off mute, so I don't have a question at this time, but I really do appreciate this information. It's very helpful, and you've laid it out in a great way to present it to fleets. So thank you so much for this whole series.
Oh, good, thank you. Oh, I see now you put that in the chat. So just a couple of things that I see in the chat. Walter asked about getting the vehicles rated for hazmat. We're actually working with FTA right now on some of those. It was one of those, I often talk about my job being like unpacking Russian nesting dolls, and I got to find the little doll and then start putting them back together again. So that was a result of unpacking. And so it's probably in the last 6 months that we all discovered that was a big oopsie that got missed. So we are talking to our folks at the Department of Transportation on what needs to be done. There's probably some modeling that they'll do first. I do not, and there's already plenty of crash test data, so I don't think they'll need to crash anything. But what we saw with fuel cell trucks when we were first modeling those is they just do like what would happen if it caught on fire. And that's the big thing. In trucks, the big thing that catches on fire are the refrigeration units. And if that refrigeration unit is right next to a fuel source that's not diesel, how does the energy release from the vehicle so that it does not make that fire worse? That's kind of the thing that jumps in my mind, just because that's the one that I'm familiar with. So I think it's probably 18 months to 2 years away, and we'll see them rated. What's really crazy is lithium ion batteries themselves are rated as a hazardous material. So we'll see. The Air Products haul hydrogen with the fuel cell trucks. Yeah, a couple of folks have big plans for hauling with fuel cell trucks. So thanks for putting in that. Funding opportunities for new fleets. Those that don't have diesel fleets for scrapping. I think we're going to see more of that come from the federal government with many of the new programs that they're releasing. California does have the HVIP program, which is not scrap and replace. And Walter, if you have some questions about that, I'm happy to answer those specifically. HVIP is super competitive and is usually fully subscribed in minutes. I think that with the federal funding that's coming and the revision for the governor's budget, we'll probably see HVIP open again. But most of the other programs, Carl Moyer, AQUIP, CCAT, they are scrap and replace programs. And by the way, I don't know if Gina's still on. We talked about this last time too. The CCAT funding, which is available from Sacramento Metro AQMD, is also, you are allowed to use that to do some planning. It doesn't have to just be vehicles. You are allowed to use that for some planning. Yes, Abe, the Central Valley Hydrogen Digester, that's the Plug Power Chevron partnership. And the federal funding to arrive. Who knows? It will be a while. It has not yet been signed, at least it wasn't signed yesterday when I last checked the news. So it has to get signed. Some of that funding is going to be issued directly to states through an existing formula that they have, and then the state will need to get it out. Our state's pretty quick at getting funding out, and they've been preparing for it for a long time. Some of the funding is coming via a new Department of Energy office that has not yet been implemented. So I think the earliest you could see an opportunity to apply for some funding is probably 8 months, which in the world of government is like lightning fast.
Mm-hmm.
One follow-up on that funding topic, Chris, and you mentioned it a little bit with reference to hydrogen, which is that the fleet operator doesn't need to own the fueling infrastructure for hydrogen, and the same is true for battery vehicles as well. In fact, you don't even need to own the vehicles. There are a number of different financial vehicles that are available for both the vehicles and the fueling/charging infrastructure, including the infrastructure as a service or the charging infrastructure as a service industry that can turn these capital investments into operating costs through some kind of a financial arrangement. So that is a one workaround that may be effective for certain fleets.
Could I ask a question or make a comment? This is Abe.
Yes, please.
I just wanted to second what Mike just said. I work for TriMet in Portland, and we're getting solicitations for 100% financing for buses and hydrogen fueling stations. So there are banks trying to make the world a better place. So that's that's nice. And then the other thing I wanted to talk about is I'm trying to source hydrogen, and it's really hard to find. And I wondered if there's any information on Centralia, Washington, hydrogen fueling station. Is that happening?
So, Abe, I will tell you that a lot of the fuels like hydrogen and renewable diesel are waiting for Washington to get the clean fuels regulation put in place. So I think you will see more of that in 2023 when the regulation is put in place, but there are a number of organizations that are already planning it. And we would love to talk to you more about that. I put my email address in the chat, and you are welcome to contact me. I have some spreadsheets that I can send you that'll be really helpful for doing your inventories. And you can also chat with me about anything else that you'd like. And Mike's going to drop his in the chat as well.
Great.
So I see Walter replied to you as well, Abe.
Oh.
Other questions? Calling people out. Julie, is there anything that you want to add? I know I'm calling people out. So big shout out to Ernie, who once again kept his camera on the whole time. So I had somebody to talk to. Thank you, Ernie.
Actually, I guess I do have a question. Is the Clean Cities website up to date with all the current incentives that are available right now, what their statuses are?
You're asking the Clean Cities website with all the incentives up to date. I don't think that we have all the incentives up to date on our website right now. We post incentives in our newsletter as we become aware of them, but we haven't necessarily kept our website fully up to date with all incentives that exist. The federal AFDC website does have, or they try to keep all the incentives up to date by state and by region within the state. So there are those sources out there. And AFDC, if you look it up sometimes, what is that? Aid for families with dependent children. So you got to go a couple of links down before you get the federal Alternative Fuel Data Center website. I don't want to stop. I see other things showing up in the chat, and I don't want to stop and stop if there are people that have questions right now. So I see, Chris, somebody's asking if you say battery electric trucks are hazmat approved.
They are not hazmat approved.
And again, if we don't have any other questions right now, I'm going to make a few announcements before we wrap it up. Just for folks to be aware, I don't know if Gina is on anymore or not, but on the 16th, November 16th, I guess that's next Tuesday, Gina will be doing a presentation at the Plug-in Electric Vehicle Collaborative, which is from 12 to 1:30. She'll be on early in that relative to this presentation, where she'll be talking about the opportunity for some fleets in the Sacramento regional area to have access to some used heavy-duty battery electric trucks at an incredibly low price. You might be interested in tuning into that presentation. That's the 16th and next Tuesday. There's also going to be a regional meeting on hydrogen that's going to happen on the 16th. It will be by invitation only because we have very limited space. Anybody who's on this call who would like to be able to participate in a meeting where we hear from hydrogen truck provider and infrastructure provider, I can't guarantee you would be able to because we have very limited space. But if you are interested, send me an email. That's ttaylor@cleancitiessacramento.org. On the 17th, next Wednesday, we have a presentation on light duty electric vehicle maintenance. This is not quite hands-on, but it's not quite totally technician level, but it's a much more detailed look at what you need to do to maintain light duty battery electric vehicles. On the 1st of December and the 15th of December, we have a couple of presentations for fleet managers and fleet staff only. And the 1st of December is on the Advanced Clean Fleet Rule. There'll be a deep dive into exactly what that rule requires. And on the 15th, that is as currently structured. And on the 15th, we'll have a deep dive into the Enhanced Inspection and Maintenance Rule that's currently being developed by the Air Resources Board. Both of those rules will have very significant impacts on fleet operators in California. And so if you're a fleet operator or a staff at a fleet, those two presentations would be very useful for you to be involved with your planning. I should also mention, Chris, this relative to that, Chris mentioned that hybrid zero emission vehicles would qualify for some, but it's important to note that the Air Resources Board's current definition of a hybrid heavy-duty electric vehicle is not what you would think. It's not sort of a conventional hybrid. It means that it can run some of its time on only electricity. So it's not quite your standard hybrid definition. On the 26th of January, we'll be doing a survey of available heavy-duty zero-emission vehicles, and infrastructure. On the 2nd of February, we'll be doing a virtual first responder training program. That will be free. All of these are free. And we will also, at some point in the near future, be doing a grant writing program. I think Chris mentioned that. We'll be doing a grant writing seminar. So all of this information will be posted on the Sacramento Clean Cities website. And today's presentation materials, as we mentioned earlier, will be on cleancitiessacramento.org, or excuse me, sacramentocleancities.org, and on the events page. So I see a couple more items showing up in the chat. Is somebody asking questions in there, or is that just people posting information? Well, Chris, much.
Ernie says he's
Go ahead.
looking for money.
Yeah.
So yeah, Tim, there's just one to you there. So I also want to make a pitch for Tim and Gina and Erica and the Clean Cities staff and the folks that we're working with here. Tim is super proactive in putting these things together. And I see that, and from what you've said, we have people from Washington, we have people from Oregon. So it's starting to really get outside our little Sacramento Valley. If you are not subscribed to the Clean Cities Sacramento email list, please do so. We have other exciting opportunities and projects and things coming up. And we want to make sure that you're all able to get the information. And I know, yes, it's another email list. Tim does not email you every week, I promise. He emails me every day, but not for the rest of you all. So please do go to the website and sign up for the mailing list so we know who you are and can invite you to the next cool thing.
So without any more questions coming up, I think we can say thank you very, very much to Chris and to Mike. This has been a fantastic series of presentations, all of which, again, will be posted to our website on the events page. And if you're interested in more information, or you can get in touch with me, my information is also there. And we will also post a document that has the information about how you reach Chris and Mike, if you haven't looked at the chat or pulled it out of the chat. And they will share some of the unique forms that they have that aren't actually the documents that were presented, but the forms for collecting information if you contact them directly.